Hello and welcome to SAP on Microsoft Azure. My name is Holger Bruchelt, and in today's video I would like to talk about single sign-on with SAP NetWeaver and Azure Active Directory. In the previous videos when we talked about the integration, one key thing was always the foundation, and that's single sign-on. For me, any kind of integration where you combine data from SAP and Microsoft really doesn't make a lot of sense if the user has to authenticate twice. So if the user has to provide his or her SAP username and then different username for the Microsoft world and then another password or something like that. So in order to really have a productive, ready integration, you always need to have single sign-on. In the past, we had lots of different ways how you can accomplish single sign-on, and that's still the case with Active Directory and the Kerberos, the very first SP-Nego implementations with the SAP NetWeaver Java stack, then the availability in the SAP NetWeaver ABAP stack and so on really helped a lot to make the single sign-on possible. Now when we're looking more and more into the Fiori world, into the SAP Fiori world with the browser-based scenarios, we also see a lot of use cases where customers are looking at leveraging Microsoft Azure Active Directory for this single sign-on, where they want to have a single sign-on between their Office 365 implementations, where they log on with their Azure Active Directory user, and then with their SAP Fiori screens and stuff like that. So what we want to accomplish in this video is actually to show you end-to-end how to set up your SAP NetWeaver system to be able to have a single sign-on configuration towards an Azure Active Directory. Okay, in order to really test this from scratch, I'm using here an image from the SAP Cloud Appliance Library. I have my SAP system installed, and even SAP Fiori is configured to some extent. So if I open the browser, if I access my SAP Fiori launchpad, I am prompted for username and password, and if I click on log on, then the SAP Fiori launchpad starts. So this is all nice, but like said, I might also be using Outlook, for example. So I'm already using Office 365, and here I have also already provided my username, so I can just click on it. I have to enter again my password, and now I can see my emails in Outlook. So this is all fine, but obviously, as you could see, I have two different user credentials. I have my Microsoft email address, more or less, for the Microsoft world, and I have my SAP user for accessing data on the SAP system. So that's why it's not super perfect, I would say. And what I want to show you now is how easy it actually is to integrate the SAP system with the Microsoft system and then establish a single sign-on. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to open the Azure portal. In the Azure portal, I can go to the Azure Active Directory configuration. The Azure Active Directory configuration obviously has all my users that are part of my Azure subscription, but I can also define so-called enterprise applications. Now, if I click on one of these enterprise applications, I can create a new application. This application is basically a placeholder for my SAP system that we are going to configure. In Azure, we have lots of pre-configured configuration or wizards basically that simplify the configuration for my SAP systems. So for example, you can see there's an entry for the SAP Cloud Platform, which would enable me to create a single sign-on experience from Microsoft Azure to the SAP Cloud Platform. In my case, my SAP system is running on SAP NetWeaver, so I'll select this as a baseline for the configuration. I can give it a name, and I'll just call it SAP NetWeaver Demo Configuration, and I click on Add. Once the application is created, I can see that currently 0 users are configured and so on, which is perfectly fine. What I want to focus on right now is this single sign-on configuration. So if I click on single sign-on, then I can enable single sign-on for this specific application. Here, I just need to go through the basic configuration steps. So I'll click on Edit and I'll enter my sign-in URL. The sign-in URL to start with will be just the URL from my Fiori launchpad. So I'll take this URL and copy it in here. I'll also take the same URL as the reply URL. Now, the last thing that is missing is a unique identifier. You could also put in here the server URL. What I'll do is I'll just call this SAML Azure Active Directory demo config. This is a unique ID that I'll need later on in my configuration. So with this, I can just click on Save, and I'm almost done on the Microsoft side. Now let's go back. I'll just click here and close the screen. And now I have to configure a unique ID between the SAP system and my Microsoft system. So typically this unique identifier could be the user principal name. Well, in my scenario, let's pretend that the user email address is this unique identifier that is common both on the SAP side and on the Azure Active Directory side. So what I'll do is I'll change the identifier from user.userPrincipal to simply user.email. Again, this now means that the user ID on the Microsoft side will have a unique identifier called the email address. And similarly on the SAP side, I'll have a user that has the email address, which is the same as the one from the Azure side, so that there can be a match between my SAP user and my Microsoft user. With this, I'm done on the SAP side. And the only thing that I need to do now is I can download the configuration file, which I then can upload to my SAP side, SAP system. So let me download the metadata XML file and save this on the disk here, on my local disk here. I will also save the certificate because I might need this later on as well. So with this, I'm almost done. Well, we'll come back to the Azure Active Directory in a second when we define the users and when we configure which users are actually allowed to use single sign-on. For now, I'll leave it as it is, and I'll jump to the SAML configuration on the NetWeaver system. So there is a transaction SAML 2. Actually, I could have started this also from the SAP GUI, but I have already opened this once. So I'll open this configuration. It might look like I already have single sign-on, but actually, since I started the session with the Fiori launchpad, I still have a session open in the browser. So that's why I didn't have to re-authenticate here for the SAML 2 configuration. In my scenario, I do want to create or I do want to enable SAML, and I want to create a local SAML identity provider. So I'll click on this one. And now I can go through the whole configuration steps. The provider name is the same one that I just created also in the Azure Active Directory. That's my unique identifier, both from the SAP side and the attribute on the Azure Active Directory. Then I click on Next. I'll leave the clock skew tolerance by the default of 120 seconds. This could become an issue, or this can become an issue when you are not using NTP or when you're not using a service on your SAP system that makes sure that the time is very accurate. Then sometimes there can be an issue and that there's a time delay between Azure Active Directory and your SAP system, and then the whole authentication might fail. But 120 seconds is typically more than enough. Now for the identity provider discovery, we'll change this to automatic and leave all the other settings as default. So with this, I'll just click on Finish. Okay, now the configuration is saved. This provider is enabled. So the next thing is we have to configure a trusted provider. In our case, the trusted provider is Azure Active Directory. So I'll go to Open Metadata File, and I'll select the certificate, or sorry, the metadata file that are previously uploaded or downloaded from Azure. So let me select the file that I just downloaded. Let's see, download. Federation metadata file, I click on Open and I click on Next. Then I need to upload the certificate file. So again, I'll click on Upload from File, I'll select Browse, I'll select the certificate and go to the next step. In the next steps, I can just leave the defaults. I'll leave the default provider name, I will leave the signature and encryption as default, same with the single sign-on endpoints, sign-out endpoints, artifact endpoints. All of these settings can be default. Only in this last step, I'll change the configuration to application URL. The assertion consumer service should be changed to application URL and the binding is HTTP post. With this, I can just click on Finish and I'm done with the SAML 2 configuration on the SAP side. The last step here is actually to select the supported name ID formats. Let me click here on Edit, and then I can add down here the email. So again, this is this unique identifier that is now the same on the SAP side and on the Microsoft side. With this, I can save the configuration and enable my provider. So the next time when I open the SAP Fiori launchpad, I should be redirected to the Microsoft authentication screen. I would enter my Microsoft credentials, and then I should hopefully be redirected to SAP. In order to make sure that the users are actually allowed to use these services, I have to first enable them in Azure. So I have to make sure that the users are able to or are allowed to use this application. So for this, I'll go back to the Azure portal. I go to users and groups, still in my SAP NetWeaver demo configuration, and I'll add a user. In my scenario, I'm starting with just one single user. Obviously, as you saw, I could also add a group or something like that. In my case, I'll just add this user Alex Wilbur. I select this one and click on Select and assign this user. So now this user is actually allowed to use single sign-on for this specific application. So we are almost done. In the last step that I now need to do, I have to go back to my SAP GUI and make sure that the email address is actually configured for the user that I want to have single sign-on. So I'll go to this user Alex W, which is also part obviously in my SAP system, and I have to make sure that the email address is maintained for this user. So let me add here the email address of this user and save the configuration on the SAP system. Okay, with this, I'm done. So let me go back to the browser. Let's close all the windows so that we are really having a clean session and we don't have any session cookies left or something like that. I open a new browser and now I'll start again the SAP Fiori launchpad. So you should hopefully see in a second that we'll open the SAP URL, but we are immediately redirected to Microsoft Online. Here I can select the Microsoft user, enter my Microsoft password, and now I'm redirected back to the SAP system. Here I'm redirected to the SAP system and I'm now logged in and authenticated with the SAP system, now with the user Alex W, and I can immediately start using the Fiori launchpad. This is also very powerful because now I could obviously also start Outlook, and I'm not authenticated anymore. I'm not asked for credentials because I am already authenticated. And obviously, vice versa is also true. Let's close the browser again. Let's open Firefox. And this time, let me start by going to Outlook.
So let's pretend I first need to read my emails. I obviously have to log in once with my credentials. Actually, this could also be a single sign-on experience because I'm already authenticated with my Windows desktop. But in this specific scenario, we have configured Outlook to ask me for credentials once. But now if I open up a new browser session and go back to the Fiori launchpad, then you will see very quickly that there was a redirect to Microsoft Online, but we are already authenticated with Microsoft Online, or with Outlook in this case, and that's why I'm immediately redirected to the Fiori launchpad, and I can start using SAP applications.
I hope this quick video showed you how easy it actually is to get started with single sign-on. If you want to give it a try yourself, I have provided a set of links that you can use to get started. The SAP Cloud Appliance Library is a great place to start from scratch without interfering with anyone else. The Azure Active Directory configuration is something that you can easily get via a free subscription from Azure. And I've also provided both a link to the wiki page about single sign-on from the SAP side, and also a tutorial that guides you through more or less the same steps that I have outlined in my video on how to set up single sign-on. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.